Yeah, my PC is doing an update or whatever right now, and I'm supposed to be drawing. So while it's updating, which is going to take a few minutes, I was like, I've got something on my mind that I want to talk about. So I may as well record myself talking about it and see if it qualifies as a video. This is going to be the first in my kind of series of more kind of generalized Vanguard discussion videos, because I've been doing the episode reviews and everything, and those are fine. And don't worry, there are going to be more of the reboot episode reviews and stuff. But there's been other aspects of the Vanguard franchise that I want to talk about that are more kind of generalized and wouldn't really fit quite right in like an episode review. And so let's test this out. Let's see how well this works. This also means, because this topic is more heavily focused on Aichi, that means that this is going to be the second Vanguard episode with an Aichi thumbnail in a row. I wish I could plan these stuff out better. But yes, so the kind of meat of the topic, right, is, I've mentioned this a billion times before, Aichi's my favorite protagonist. And I kind of gave a surface level explanation as to why in my very first I'll Look at Carve Vanguard video. And I mentioned it in passing here and there, but I've never done like a full kind of in-depth discussion as to why. And this time we're not going to be talking about him as a whole, but we're going to be talking about a particular facet of his character that kind of plays a big role as to why he is my favorite. And we're also going to tie that into Reboot Aichi and how Reboot Aichi, who I qualify as a completely different character, is different, you know? And so I've seen the argument float around, right? That the cool thing about the reboot is that all of the characters have more kind of bearing on the world. In the original, the plot just kind of happened, right? So tournaments and stuff would be set up, and characters would just kind of join the tournament out of obligation. That's kind of the motivation for the main cast of characters. What's that motivation? Exactly, that's the point, you know? Like, the main characters, Aichi, Misaki, Kamui, and Kai, some of them to more of an extent than others, don't really have much motivation in the first arc. Misaki is getting over her parents and everything, but she's not that interested in the card game itself, and she seems very passive. And same goes for the other three. At least compared to reboot versions anyway. The reboot version, these characters are all a lot more kind of energetic and focused. And I've heard this be a praise of the series. I've heard this be a praise of the reboot, because people like that these characters are having a more involving and engaging impact on what's happening around them. And on paper, that sounds fantastic. And to a certain extent, that does sound fantastic. In the case of Misaki, I like that Misaki is more kind of energetic in the reboot, and I like that Kamui has a more kind of definite goal, and one that's focused on more. And it is interesting to see what they've done with Kai. Again, I think they've changed Kai to the extent that he could be considered like a different character at this point. But I will admit it's at least interesting to see what they've done with him. But that's the thing, right? So if you kind of put everything under the umbrella like that and be like, it's cool that these characters are more engaging, and that is interesting. But I kind of have a problem with that, especially with Aichi. And that's not the point. And I don't want to say that your interpretation's wrong or anything. I'm just going to kind of give my point of view on this. But to me, from the very beginning, one of the things that made Vanguard such an interesting franchise is it kind of ignored and intentionally subverted a lot of the expectations that would come with a card game anime. So, for example, you know, if you look at this from the point of view of a Yu-Gi-Oh series or whatever, Kai would most likely fall under more of the kind of personality traits and actions of more of a Yu-Gi-Oh character. You know, he feels more like a Yu-Gi-Oh protagonist, especially with his involvement with Ren and his dark backstory and everything. And Aichi doesn't feel like that. Aichi feels like a side character. He's really shy, he can barely card fight at first, and he has no real bearing on the plot overall. We're starting to kind of make a point out of this now, eh? And that's what I really like about Aichi. Aichi doesn't really have kind of much bearing with the plot at all. And that's the thing. At the beginning, in the very first episode, when he makes a decision in both the reboot and the original, when he makes a decision, you know what, for once in my life, I'm going to fight and get this Blaster Blade back. That's a turning point for Aichi and the beginning of his character arc. I think we can all agree with that, right? We can all be like, okay, Aichi starts off shy, and then the inciting incident, as film majors would call it, happens where his Blaster Blade is taken and he decides, okay, I'm actually going to take it back for once in my life. And in Reboot Aichi, this causes an exponential kind of upwards motion. So if this was like a line graph, that moment would be like so the it would be kind of going up like gradually, and then that moment happens where his Blaster Blade is taken and he wins it back. And then from that point on would be more or less an upwards line as to Aichi's character. Whereas what I find so interesting about the original Aichi is that point happens and it does cause the line to go upwards, but at a much slower motion, and he doesn't really start to kind of get much impact on the overall plot until, you know, near the end of the Age of Circa arc / near the beginning of the Link Joker arc. And that's what a character arc is. Basically, my argument here is that the reboot kind of skips out a very large portion of Aichi's character arc, and that, you know, only a handful of episodes into this reboot, Aichi is already a little bit too competent. He's already a little bit too energetic, and he's already a little bit too protagonist-like. And I don't necessarily have that much of a problem with Reboot Aichi, because on his own, even if you took like the original out of it and everything, and you just kind of focused on Reboot Aichi on his own, then he'd be an okay character, but I don't think he'd be a character that would have become my favorite, you know? Because that's the thing, Aichi has a really long struggle. He's not a protagonist necessarily, at least not in the way he acts. And in fact, he acts a lot more realistically and a lot more like a shy nerd. You know, like he gets introduced to this card game and everything, and not only does he get better at the card game slowly over time, and, you know, loses against most of the people that he plays against at first, but he also gets better at interacting with people around him. And that's one of the major draws of a card game, right? You know, you travel around, go to different tournaments, meet up with different people, and go to different card shops, and get better at socializing with said people. And that, to me, is what made Aichi a relatable character, especially in the Link Joker arc, where he became an amazingly powerful card fighter, which took him over 100 episodes to do. But he's still really shy, and he's gotten better, but he's still not perfect. And this is a much more kind of nuanced and realistic approach to a character like this. And that's what I really like about Aichi, you know? Whereas Reboot Aichi just kind of, he wins Blaster Blade back, and then something kind of unlocks within his brain. And he does lose like 1 or 2 times, I think. Honestly, at this point, I'm already kind of forgetting a lot of the stuff that happened in the reboot, even though I watched it only recently and did these videos and stuff about it. And he loses like once or twice, I think. But yeah, other than that, he like wins almost every time and becomes so much more sociable and becomes the reason that Misaki gets into card fighting and becomes the first of the main characters to actually beat one of the members of AL4. And so on and so forth. Like, he's an amazing card fighter, and yes, he loses against Leon, but even that loss is taken as a whole, like, oh, you lost, but you did amazingly well considering how new you are and considering how powerful Leon is and everything. So it was technically a loss, but it was like a pat on the back, kind of like, wow, you like won in our hearts kind of loss. You know, which is funny because episode 4, I think, of Vanguard did the exact opposite of this, and I praised it for doing this back in the day, and that was, had the moment where Aichi lost, and he said, no, I lost. She won, she was better than me, stop giving me so much credit, basically. And I really liked that because it was more of like a realistic depiction, and it kind of showed that, yes, Misaki is better, Aichi is still very, very flawed. But after that point, he kind of just became Mary Sue. Not a complete Mary Sue, but a lot more of one than the original Aichi, who became a nervous wreck even talking in front of his classmates. And sure, in the first episode of the reboot that happens too, but that's before the turning point where he wins back Blaster Blade. The second he wins back Blaster Blade, he becomes a different character to me. You know, he's constantly winning. He loses a couple times, but he's definitely become a lot more powerful and a lot more competent. And on the surface, him being a better card fighter isn't necessarily a bad thing. But to me, one of the biggest appeals of the very first story arc was seeing his slow rise and journey to the top. Yeah, basically that's my opinion of this whole like, oh, Aichi should have more bearing on the plot and should be more of a protagonist that kicks the heck out of Ren. And I don't necessarily agree. I think him being a shy nerd that slowly rises to the top, and I mean slowly, is good enough for me. I don't know.